This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and we are live for a bit of a unique interview. I'll put the picture of his book up right now. He is a retired New York City sergeant who was a detective, and he's written a book about a lot of his experiences over the years. He's also a fourth degree black belt under Renzo Gracie in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and he still trains at an MMA Academy in Staten Island, New York. And his opinion has been used for several movies, including movies that involved Robert DeNiro and Spike Lee. So, Mike Codella, great to have you on. Thanks for joining me today for this interview. We've had mobsters on, but not detectives.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I know you had a couple of wise guys on. I've seen them.
Yeah. Those weren't necessarily me doing them. Those were the King of Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
who likes to do those. Those guys are some interesting characters, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, so I knew. I had my dealings with a couple of old time wise guys years ago when I was a kid.
So, what was your childhood like? You mentioned that. Did you have interactions with crime growing up
Yeah,
that made you want to be in the police business?
I had a few. I had a few interactions that they weren't the greatest. Let's just say that one or two in particular that after the whole event happened and I had a chance to digest it, I was like, this isn't the life that this isn't the life for me. Basically, there was in the short interactions I had with these guys, there was already backstabbing and treachery. So I realized it's a tough that's a tough existence.
How old would you have been at that time?
I was about 16, 17 in both incidents. One was one of the incidents happened. Well, it dealt with Eddie Lino, who was one of John Gotti's main guys at the time, um, and basically he asked couple of guys that I knew to rob uh, a bar in Brooklyn, that a closed down bar in Brooklyn, New York, in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and in the bar were these Joker poker machines, and Joker poker machines are machines that people gambled on in restaurants and bars years ago, and they were actually illegal. Um, but and Eddie Lino and other wise guys put them out, and they had the monopoly of these Joker poker machines. But in any event, he asked one of my friends if he could. One of my friends who idolized him, I guess, uh, if he could go basically do a heist and get these machines out. So my friend had another guy lined up, and he asked me to be the third guy in this thing, and I went along with it. It wasn't like I really needed the money at the time. To be honest, I had a job. I always worked. I was doing construction. I was a kid, but I didn't really need the money. But I just thought it'd be something interesting to do, and have a good time and whatever. And basically, we took all these machines out of this bar in Red Hook and we used a stolen box truck. We almost got pinched by the cops in the truck, and we don't. And then when we meet this guy Eddie Lino, he the deal was supposed to be just get the machines, bring them to this park in Brooklyn, and he was going to pay us. And when we get there, he doesn't really want to pay us at that point. He wants us to do some other stuff with the machines and all this other shit. And you know what? He heard me arguing with one of my friends about, look, I'm done. We were going to bring him here, and it was over. I thought we were getting paid for this, and he called me over. Eddie Lino called me over, and I knew his reputation. I knew he was he had done some bodies. From what I heard, I knew he was Gotti's guy, and he was just not a nice person. Even in these couple of minutes I've met him, I could see he was, just had like an attitude, a bit of a scumbag. And he called me over. What's the problem? And I told, basically I told him wanted to get paid. I didn't think I had to do more than this. And he gave me the money begrudgingly, and basically told me go F myself. He gave me the money. I really thought he was going to either try to punch me in the mouth at the time, or when I turned my back, really, I thought he was going to just put a bullet in the back of my head. That's the feeling I got off of him. And that was my only dealing with Eddie Lino. He eventually gets killed by, I don't know if you ever heard of the Mafia cops, the two cops that were on the take for the Lucchese family in New York. Anyway, he gets killed on the Belt Parkway. So he got his justified ends, I guess. But that's the tough life. That's the life these guys live.
So for someone like me who's from Canada here, and there's people watching in other places that have probably never even been to New York City, is it like the movies? Is there a big mafia presence, or is this exaggerated?
I'm from Canarsie, Brooklyn, and Canarsie has changed drastically in recent years, but there was a pretty decent mafia presence. I don't think the mafia wasn't as strong as it was in other parts of Brooklyn, Bensonhurst or Dyker Heights, but there was mob social clubs, and everyone knew who was connected or whose family was connected. So yeah, we had a pretty strong presence, actually.
Now, does this go all the way down to like high schools? Will there be like high school kids that you'll know are connected with the mob that you don't mess with?
I mean, whose father was like my good friends. Now, those guys I did that job with, they weren't guys that I hung around with on a normal everyday basis. But some of my good friends that I hung around with, like on a daily basis, their fathers were connected guys, and one of them was godson to the head of the Lucchese family. I went to school with a couple of girls that fathers were big shots, and we knew who they were. And I wouldn't say the mob recruited kids in high school so much. I would more be inclined to say that kids in high school gravitated towards guys that they wanted to emulate, and that's how they got hooked up in the mob.
So the reason you didn't want to go down that path was, although it seems like you got away with your crime, it wasn't worth it. And how did you end up going into the police force?
Yeah, like I said, when I turned my back on this guy, I really thought he was going to shoot me in the back of the head. And, I could just see that, just the way he treated younger guys, and the whole attitude, the whole situation stunk. I could tell right away that, and there was a couple other incidents when I dealt with these guys, and, it's really like a dog-eat-dog treachery existence, and it's all about money, and they never have enough. It's a crazy world. What happened was I was kind of like floundering around. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. I knew that wasn't the path I wanted to take, and I just basically took the police test, and I did okay on it. And it took like a year or two, and I got called, and that was it. I went in, and once I decided to become a cop, I really wanted to, give it my all, basically.
So how did you end up becoming an undercover detective? Obviously, you probably had to start as a regular street cop or something.
Yeah, I initially started in Coney Island, in Brooklyn, and Coney Island. Everybody, when people think of Coney Island, unless they're from the area, people hear Coney Island and they think of the beach. They think of Nathan's Franks. They think, they have a total misunderstanding of what Coney Island was and what it is today. Coney Island, there is an amusement area. There is the beach, but it's also an impoverished neighborhood. There's projects there, very low income, high crime rate, and that's where I initially started out as a cop. And I got my feet wet there. I enjoyed working there, but it was better. I wanted to be more active, and Alphabet City in Manhattan which is Lower Manhattan. Now they call it the East Village. But Alphabet City was a very, very high crime rate with, especially with heroin. It was literally the heroin capital of the world, and people would come from all over the United States just to cop their dope there, and even tourists from other parts of the world when they needed, if they were users or they wanted to try dope or something, they'd end up in Alphabet City.
Now, just out of curiosity, what's the difference between the heroin and OxyContin? You always hear they're this similar.
Yeah, well, OxyContin's basically manufactured prescription drug. It obviously comes in a pill, but it's an opioid, and it's really not that much of a difference. And it's very addictive. I don't know if it's as addictive as pure heroin, but it's very addictive. And again, it's an opioid, so it's really not much of a difference. Streetwise, heroin is a lot cheaper. Well, it's a lot cheaper now. And when I was an undercover, when I was even in plainclothes cop or whatever, OxyContin didn't even exist. It couldn't even be compared to any, heroin couldn't be compared to anything but heroin. There was nothing out there. But now there's the OxyContin, and it's more expensive for junkies. So what will happen is if somebody will get hooked on OxyContins, maybe they got medicine prescribed to them legitimately, and then they get hooked. And then when the doctor cuts them off from getting more pills, they turn to heroin.
Okay, I see. Yeah, because I know in wrestling, OxyContin at one point there was a lot of wrestlers addicted to it, but it's not as bad from what I hear now.
Yeah, because doctors were prescribing it for for painkillers, and it was at the time I believe that a lot of doctors thought OxyContin wasn't. I mean, when the manufacturers of the drug pushed it onto these doctors, they sold it under the premise that it wasn't addictive. That was a painkiller, and it was like the greatest thing in the world, and it took care of your injuries, and you could train with it, and you weren't going to get addicted. But that was, like I said, I don't know if they knew it at the time or they found it out, but that turned out to be a farce, and a lot of athletes got hooked up. A lot of got hooked on it. A lot of young kids who were young athletes would get hurt during high school football or wrestling, and they were given OxyContin, and the next thing you know, they a couple of weeks later they were hooked on it.
So you started working the Coney Island area with the heroin. What are some of the bigger issues that you ran into there?
Coney Island, like I said, it's an impoverished neighborhood, and there's it's robberies, constant assault. Tourists who are trying to go see these attractions would get robbed off, and sometimes it was almost I don't want to use the word funny, but sometimes there would be tourists in a car, and they would ask, like, we'd literally be 2 blocks away or a block away from Coney Island amusement or the beach, and they'd say, they'd have their windows closed, they'd roll them down to ask a cop, where's Coney Island? I'm like, you're in Coney Island. No, the real Coney Island. Well, this is the real Coney Island. You're looking for the amusement park. That's around the corner. And, you got to make sure you be careful going there. Make sure you watch yourself walking out of your car or into your car. And, of course, be careful, at the amusement park.
Wow. So it's a total misconception. So from there, where did you progress to become a detective?
From there, what I did was I put in for a transfer, like I said, to Alphabet City, which is downtown Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. Again, now they call it the East Village. Back then, it was called Alphabet City because it's Avenue B, Avenue A, Avenue B, Avenue C, and Avenue D. So that's the alphabet. That's where the alphabets come in. And when I was in the police academy, on occasion, I would get a ride in from my friend who was in the academy with me, from my friend's father, who was a cop, and he worked right next to the police academy. And we drove down Alphabet City a couple of times as a shortcut to the police academy. And They were literally drug addicts lined up in an orderly manner with money in their hands, waiting to cop heroin. And I mean, not like 3, 4, 5 guys. I mean, like 20, 25 people would be in a line waiting to cop dope. And I asked my friend's father, "What's going on here? What's as we drove by, what's going on here? What is this?" And he said, these people are junkies, drug addicts, looking to score heroin. And like, it boggled my mind how they could get away with this. And I was like, what is this city doing about this? What is the police department doing about this? And basically his answer was, they don't do anything because the city didn't mind it being contained in Alphabet City. The heroin, the drug addicts, the junkies, they had shooting galleries that were the abandoned buildings where they would go in and shoot up and get high. And so when I had the opportunity to transfer, that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to go down there and see if I could make a difference, basically.
So to make a difference, what were some of your things that you had to do once you got transferred into there?
Well, I was lucky enough that, one of the reasons I went down there, or was so anxious to go down there, was because a guy that I had met in the police academy, that actually grew up not far from me, was just a year older than me, went to Alphabet City prior to me getting there. He worked in Coney Island for a while, and then he went to Alphabet City. And we kept in touch. Like I said, we met in the police academy, and we just got along right off the bat. And he was telling me, as I assumed it would be, how wild it was down there, how crazy and how active. And you can make a collar, make an arrest anytime you want, basically. So I went down there to work with him. And I did. When I got down there, they put us together, and we were in uniform together. And we made a lot of drug arrests right off the bat. Like, we were locking up buyers, dealers, you name it, and every kind of car, not just drugs. Anything that, any chance we had, we would make an arrest. So of course that brought us the attention of the captain of the command, and he put me and my partner in a unit called Operation 8. And Operation 8 was a federally funded unit, meaning the government paid for it. And it was 4 cops and 1 sergeant. And the 8 stood for the 8 projects in Alphabet City that were the worst projects in Manhattan, or in Alphabet City, I should say. And we were in plain clothes. We had a government undercover car. Government paid our overtime, paid for our radio. We weren't undercover, so to speak, because we locked up people and they knew who we were because we stayed in the same area and we would lock up people. But my partner and I got to be pretty well known because we were locking up everyone. And there came a point when we realized to really get this job done, we got to do some things that go against procedure and actually were actually against the law. And we did. And our whole concept was, did the ends justify the means? Basically, was what we were doing, even though it was maybe viewed as wrong and illegal, but did what we were doing helping the big picture? And we thought it did. And that's what my book is about. And basically that's what we did out. That's how we worked in Alphabet City.
So what's an example of something that wasn't necessarily by the book that you had to do to get what you wanted?
So to understand Alphabet City, it's, first of all, at the time, and I'm sure it's still like that, it was the most densely populated area in the world. It was, I remember at the time, an article came out in the New York Times saying, per square foot, there are more people living on Avenue D, which is part of Alphabet City, more people living in Alphabet City, walled houses, Reese houses, and Baruch houses, which are New York City projects. There are more people living there than the most densely populated area in the world. More densely populated than the busiest place in China, Japan, India. So to kind of wrap your head around that, we're talking about 14 or 15 more, probably, because it comes from Delancey Street all the way to 14th Street. So about 20 blocks of New York City housing projects with high-rise buildings, and that's how densely populated it was. And it was a city unto its own. So the heroin trade infiltrated almost all the families were involved. There's so many families involved, I can't even tell you. I can't say every family, obviously, but so many people made money from the heroin trade, whether it's the older people who kept the dope in their apartment, for the younger people, for the teenager who's calling out brand names and looking out, making sure the cops don't get make arrests, to the actual dealer, to the guy running the dope back and forth from the person on the street. One operation called for so many people involved, and there were dozens of operations. So we had to get to the information of who was dealing and where they were dealing, and that wasn't easy to get, whether you were in uniform or plain clothes. So we either pay people right out of our pocket, because to have an informant, a legal informant, they can't be on parole, they can't be on probation, they can't have certain arrests under their belt. There's so many restrictions on who you could use as an informant that we use people that normally wouldn't be allowed to be used. So we would pay people out of our pocket, cash, or if we grabbed the guy and he had dope on us and somebody told us that guy was going to have dope on him, a dealer, we'd take dope and we'd pay the informant with the dope. Whatever made sense at the time. Those are some of the things that we've done. We did a lot of things, but those are some of the things that we've done off the top of my head.
At one point, you had, I guess, a $50,000 bounty on your head. How did you find out about that? And was there ever any attempts made on your life for that?
I'll tell you how we found out about it. So, well, we were doing such a number on these dealers, meaning hurting them in their pocket. So a guy would put out a brand of his dope. He would put a dealer on the street. There would be a lookout. There would be the guy actually doing a hand-to-hand. There'd be a guy running the dope back and forth to him on the corner. And we would lock them all up. And we'd get all their money. We'd get their drugs. We'd take the steerer. So we'd lock up 4, 5, 6. Then if we took some buyers, some people that were just drug users, and we were doing this constantly. And the drug dealers were taking a hit. I mean, a bad hit. If let's just say, for argument's sake, the average dealer was holding 200 bags of dope, that's $200,000. I'm sorry, $2,000. So they would lose $2,000 right there. And we were doing it all day long, and we were really hurting them. So a few of the dealers got together with the main guy. So there was one guy who was kind of in charge of all the operations. He's in my book. He was an ex-Marine. He was a tough guy. He killed a lot of people. He actually admitted in court to killing 18 people and having played a part in killing over 100 people. And this is what he admitted under oath. So that's the kind of guy he was. So him and a bunch of his underlings put in a $50,000 contract for me and $50,000 for my partner. And the way we found out about it was there was a bank robbery on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And whenever there's a bank robbery, the FBI gets involved. And the NYPD's major case guys get involved. So they had this informant that was giving them information on this possible bank robbery suspect. And in the course of the conversation, he veers off that conversation regarding the robbery, and he says, there's two guys on the Lower East Side, meaning me and my partner, and he calls us by our nicknames. He says, and there's a $50,000 contract on both of them. And as soon as he said that kind of stopped the investigation regarding the robbery. And they made some calls, and they grabbed some informants that they had been working with legally, and it was verified that it was. So they took us out of Lower East Side for a little while, and they moved us up to Harlem until they could talk to some of these guys that put the money in and let them know that the police and the FBI were onto them and shook them up a little bit. And then we eventually went back down to Lower East Side. There wasn't an actual attempt made on our lives. Apparently, they couldn't get anyone to take the contract because nobody wants to kill 2 cops. Supposedly, there were some people from the Dominican Republic that were interested and were coming up to do it. But at that point, the FBI was involved without detectives, and they backed off actually taking that contract.
There's a fan on here that wants to know what actually shows up when you guys run somebody's license plate.
So the who the car's registered to, the name, the address, and from the name and the address of the owner of the vehicle, you could get his past, you could get his criminal history, of course, and you could get his past driving record.
Matt R. wants to know, was the mob the main influence on the RICO Act being made?
The RICO Act was actually enacted years before it was ever used by Giuliani. Why they actually put it together, I don't know, to be honest, but no one ever used it other than Giuliani was the first one to ever use it successfully anyway. And he decimated the mob basically with it.
What was the biggest drug bust you were personally involved with?
Well, the case in Lower East Side, we eventually hooked up with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. It turned out that after my partner and I were there for so many years, and like I said, we knew everybody. We had all these informants. We had locked up, I hate to say everybody, but we locked up virtually everybody that was involved with drugs at one point or another. That don't mean they did time. They went in and they came out, and but eventually the drug enforcement had a case on some pretty heavyweight guys that we knew, and they asked my partner and I if we knew them. They had made an arrest, and the case got these guys. The U.S. attorney didn't prosecute these particular guys from Alphabet City. Apparently, they didn't have enough evidence. So they came to my partner and I because they had heard of us and they knew how entrenched we were in the Alphabet City, and how we knew everybody down in Alphabet City. And they came to us with a bunch of pictures, a bunch of mugshots, and they asked us if we knew these guys, like maybe 7, 8 guys. And we did. We knew them all, basically. So what they did was they went to my chief and they drafted my partner and I, which, of course, we knew about. They drafted us into the DEA, and we eventually, of course, with the Drug Enforcement Administration, we were able to get one of their informants, one of their CIs, confidential informant. We pointed him in the right direction of who to buy from, and he bought from him, and they moved up the ladder, and we did a wiretap on a few of these guys' phones, and we subsequently locked up 40 heroin dealers from Alphabet City. At the time, one of the biggest heroin takedowns ever. And we really closed down Alphabet City as far as heroin for quite a long time. And for those people that know the area, it's been so revised since then. At the time, it was like I said, it was a crime-ridden and tough place to live. And after that case, a lot of young people started buying property and building the neighborhood up and became more gentrified. And that's when they changed the name from Alphabet City to the East Village.
The 495 Marauder wants to know, of any of the original 5 families still active in 2022 with smart technology, are any of the original 5 still active? I meant.
Yeah, I believe most of them are. I know the Lucchese, the Genovese, they're still strong. The Colombo guys still got people out there. Genovese, Gambinos, they're all active. They're not as prevalent as they were, and they're actually getting smarter. They're not using the phones the way they did. It's a new generation, and technology. The bottom line is criminals are able to adapt, and as technology gets more enhanced, or they some of these guys aren't stupid. A lot of them aren't stupid, actually. And now they even got guys that they go to college or they go to jail and they come out with all this education from other inmates. So they're all active. They're still all active.
Jay wants to know any tips for a civilian getting pulled over. I'm guessing he means for like an innocent person that just wants to get it over with.
Yeah, like I tell my kids, I tell everybody that ever asks, first thing you should do is open your window, whether you have a tinted windows or not. You should open your window when you know you're getting pulled over. Either put your hand on the steering wheel, or I've been pulled over many times. Even when I was undercover, I got pulled over. When I was undercover, I got a gun stuck to my head by a cop and actually cocked the trigger, which is unheard of. I mean, all he had to do, there's no trigger pressure when a trigger's cocked. It takes no pressure to pull that for the gun to go off. So, so I'm very fearful about getting pulled over and getting grabbed by cops. I've had some bad experiences. But anyway, when you get pulled over, roll the window down. Either keep your hands on the steering wheel or actually put them. Or actually put your hands right out the window, which is what I always do, so the cop sees your hands. Cops are human. If they get scared, who knows? God forbid, it only takes a mistake for them to shoot somebody. Never go reaching for your wallet or your ID or let me get my ID before he comes. Don't do that. I actually know a cop that shot somebody who was reaching under his seat for something, and he killed the guy. Of course, the cop lost his job. I knew the cop well. He was actually a nice guy. It was very out of character, but it was on a midnight tour. He must have been scared. And the guy reached under the seat, I think, to get his wallet. And this individual that I knew, this cop shot him and he killed him. And then the cop, of course, has to live with that. So I always tell my kids, don't reach for anything. Just keep your hands. When he wants to see your license, he'll tell you get your license. You tell him where it is, and then you go reach for it. That's the best advice I could give.
David wants to know if you ever worked with a canine.
No. When I worked in missing persons for a little while, where I worked some pretty decent cases, and I've seen canines go to work. We've used them. I've never personally had a canine or worked with them.
Matt would like to know how popular was Rudy Giuliani amongst the NYPD.
It's crazy. I got to tell you, because I always liked Rudy Giuliani, but as an overall picture, cops didn't like him because he didn't give us a raise. Believe it or not, he backed us, which is why I liked him. And at the time, I wasn't like a money hungry guy, and I didn't really care so much about the raise. I was more concerned with the fact that he backed the cops and he liked cops. So I always liked Giuliani, but a lot of the senior guys didn't like him because he didn't give us, like, when our contract was up, he gave us zeros, meaning no raise increase. He made, guys that had to feed their families basically, and were hoping for more money. He didn't do right by us in that respect. But I think you had to make a decision, and then. Obviously, I think I made the right decision by liking him, because if you look at what New York, I don't know how familiar you guys are, but if you look at what New York has had in the last few years, not only does the mayor didn't care about cops, but the whole society as a whole in New York hated cops because the mayor didn't respect us. So I think Giuliani was great, actually.
Now, of course, you were there working on the September 11th terrorist attacks. How was that? That must have been complete chaos.
I was actually, at the time, I was assigned to I was assigned to what was called the Secret Service task force. And we didn't do protection or none of that bodyguard stuff. We actually worked, the units I worked in, we worked cases. I was a sergeant, so I had detectives working under me in the West African Task Force and the Secret Service Electronic Crime Task Force. And our office was in 7 World Trade Center, which wasn't hit by the plane, but which burned, one of the buildings that burned to the ground. That morning, I happened to be a little bit late, and I used to make my own hours, basically. So I got it around whatever time I wanted, 9:30, 10, whatever. And by the time
Oh, we lost him for a second there. Hopefully he'll come back. I guess someone didn't want him. Someone didn't want that information coming out of what he was doing the day of the 9/11 attack. Let me just message him here. Strange. But thanks for the questions, guys. Hopefully we can get him back on here to finish his story about 9/11, because Mike was just about to get into it. He was, of course, involved with getting things back to normal. Williams, his Facebook blocked him. Very funny. Yeah, it's weird, some of the stuff that social media decides to block and some of the things that they decide to let go. If we have lost him for good, we'll have him back on and we'll get that story another time. And he also has a podcast, by the way, called Up Against the Wall, as he is back on now.
I don't know what happened there. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I was just telling people you got the Up Against the Wall podcast while you were disappearing there. So
Thank you, man. Yeah. It's a YouTube page. Thank you, man. Up Against the Wall. Mike Codella, Up Against the Wall. It's on YouTube. So anyway, my office was in the World Trade Center. I was a little bit late to work. By the time I got into the city, both planes had crashed into the buildings. And as soon as I got out of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, I pulled over and ran into the building. They didn't want to let me towards the building, but it was all barricaded off. I tinned my way in, meaning I identified myself. I ran into the building and tried to help the people start to come out the building. And that's when the building came down. Basically, the building came down on my head. I was in the lobby as the building came down. I got knocked down, almost knocked unconscious. And I was lucky. While I was on the ground, somebody shined a big light into the sky and said, because it was pitch black, you couldn't see anything. It was darker. It was the darkest I've ever seen in my life. It's like if you close your eyes and put something black over your eyes. That's how black it was from the smoke and from the ashes from the building coming down. So I was on the floor, and somebody puts some big light up in the sky and said, if you could see the light, walk towards the light. So by the time I got up, felt around, I felt a car that was turned over. I walked towards the light, and the guy who I happened to know at the time, of course I didn't know it was him who had shined the light up, but it was a cop that I knew. He brought me into a building, and basically, I guess he saved my life because stuff was still coming down. I mean, I look like all those people you see on TV or that's all covered with white and all that stuff. That's how I looked. And then from there, I went to the hospital for a short time. They cleaned up my eyes because I couldn't see anything. And then I went back and I that night, I helped dig people out. After that, eventually they took my whole unit, they took my whole unit or division, and they put us in the morgue. People first they put a lot of people in the hospital waiting for the injured to come, but nobody. That didn't include me, but they put people in the hospital, but nobody. They staffed the hospital expecting a big increase of a big rush of people injured going into the hospital, but nobody went into the hospital because most of the people died basically. So after the first night of trying to dig people out and stuff, then they made assignments. They assigned my whole unit to the morgue basically, and we had to deal with unfortunately we had to deal with the dead bodies and stuff like that.
Now, were you pretty confident right away that it was terrorist related, or what was your first reaction when you're seeing this happen?
When I wasn't in the beginning after the first plane, that was literally the furthest thing from my head was terrorist. But once the second plane hit, I think most people. The radio. I remember the radios, and we were reporting that it was probably terrorism, and of course, and then speaking to guys right off the bat, we pretty pretty much knew it was terrorism right as soon as the second plane hit.
Now, obviously, there's probably better protocols in place now to avoid situations like that happening in New York City again.
Yeah, well, they have the NYPD has really advanced helicopters and all kinds of aerial systems, and I know the Army has planes that are on ready, are on ready here in New York. They're on alert, basically. So, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if that could ever be helped. I think if they ever want to hit, they'd have the opportunity regardless. But there are things that have been implemented since, but who knows how, I guess let's hope we never have to find out.
So you were also involved in the Son of Sam murder investigations. Could you get into that a little bit?
Do you know who that is? I'm just curious. How
I've seen
are
the
you guys?
movie. I've seen the movie.
Okay.
That's about it.
Yeah. So Son of Sam was a serial killer here in New York in the 1976 and 1977. And his name was David Berkowitz. Now, if you believe the narrative, so to speak, or if you believe what I guess movies say, then he was a lone gunman who killed 6 people and shot, shot 8 others. Killed 6, I think, and shot 8 on his own. That's if you believe the narrative of what they try to, what's been said about David Berkowitz and the Son of Sam. And he got the name Son of Sam. Well, he had 2 names. One was a 44 caliber killer because the killer used a 44 caliber bulldog revolver, and also Son of Sam. He got the name Son of Sam because, according to him, his neighbor's dog told him to kill, and his neighbor's name was Sam Carr. Now, if you believe, so when he first got arrested in August of 77, the way they arrested him was they tracked he had shot somebody and used his vehicle, killed someone actually, and used his own vehicle. And a uniformed cop happened to write his car a summons the night of the killing. And they tracked that summons down to him out in Yonkers, New York. Now, when he first got arrested, he said that his neighbor's dog told him to do these killings, and he perpetrated as if he was a mentally deranged person, basically talking about dogs talking to him and all kinds of nonsense. A few years later, he came forward and he said all that dog stuff was bullshit, and I was part of the satanic cult, and I didn't act alone. Basically, he worked with other people in regarding his shootings. Now that was in 77. Of course, in 1977, I was a kid. But years later, in 1997, I believe it was. So 20 years later, I was a cop. I was a sergeant, and I was assigned to the NYPD Missing Persons Squad. And I get a call from an inmate in Attica State Prison. And the inmate is a motorcycle, a 1% motorcycle biker. And he's in Attica State Prison, and he's looking to get paroled. And so he wants to cooperate, give us information that, according to him, had never been given out before. And he wants to cooperate and give us information regarding Son of Sam and this case called Etan Patz missing child case. Now, Etan Patz was a kid that was missing in 1979. And Etan was a little boy in Soho, New York, who for the first time was walking to the bus stop. And the mother was watching him from her window, and she literally turned around for a minute, and the kid disappeared. And that case was such a high-profile case that he was the first little boy ever put on a milk carton. And President Reagan made May 25th National Missing Child Day, or National Missing Children's Day, all because of Etan Patz. Now, these cases never had anything in common. Berkowitz was 76, 77. he was a serial killer. Etan Patz was a little boy going to school on his own, and he disappeared. So the two cases really didn't have anything to do with each other. However, this inmate calls me up and he says he's got information on Etan Patz, the missing kid. So I go up to Attica, New York, Attica State Prison rather, and I go talk to this 350-pound, 1% biker guy who is in jail for sodomizing his little daughter. So right off the bat, you know what kind of individual I'm dealing with. A sexual pervert who is doing time and who should be in there for life. But he wants to get on parole and he wants to give me information. So he basically tells me the story, how him and his biker gang were contracted to do these work security for the satanic cult up in Westchester and Yonkers, New York. And the satanic cult, the bikers secured the location, wearing their colors in case cops came. They were going to fight the cops, or in case any civilians came, they were going to keep the civilians away. And they were intimidating. The bikers were intimidating to most people, of course. And that's what they were doing. And he does it for so often. He gets to know these people in these mansions. And what's going on in these mansions are satanic rituals, sex parties and drug parties, and just wild, crazy stuff. He gets to know these individuals, and they take a liking to him and the president of the biker gang, and they let him in to these mansions. So now not only is he doing security, but he's part of this clique, so to speak. And at some point, he walks into one of these mansions, and they call out this little boy, Etan Patz's name, and they put him on this makeshift altar. And according to him, he leaves at the time, but he later finds out that they sacrificed his kid. Now, the way that ties into Berkowitz was, according to him and other accounts, that this is supposedly the same cult that Berkowitz was involved with when he later on, after getting arrested several years later, when he said he was involved with a cult that worked with him. The problem with that is Berkowitz, after he said that, somebody in jail sliced him, just missing his jugular vein, and he never spoke of the cult again. So that's how the two tied together, and that's how my investigation. That's what I did as far as investigating the Berkowitz and Etan Patz case.
So do you think him getting sliced had to do with him talking about the cult, and that was a message to stop talking about it?
Well, according to him, it was. Berkowitz had family, and he was like, they almost got me. If I continue talking, they're going to get my family. And he's got, I believe, a sister and some other relatives that supposedly he's protecting. That's what he led us to believe. I'm not sure how true that is. In jail, as many of you know, you can do anything and get sliced on you can get cut. But it was kind of coincidental that as soon as he started talking about these other killers and the satanic group, that's what happened to him.
Now, you were also involved with one of Jay-Z's arrests, I guess. Could you tell us about that?
Well, we didn't actually. I didn't lock up Jay-Z. What happened was, when I was in the DEA, my chief asked me. We had done that Alphabet City case, and we wrapped it up, and we were looking to start a case. And the chief asked me. He said, "There's these guys in Red Hook Projects, which is the same area where that bar was when I was a kid. The bar we took off." He said, "There's these guys in Red Hook Projects and Gowanus houses, two really bad neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And there's a lot of shootings going on. These drug gangs are killing each other. The civilians aren't safe." And he said, it's really a bad situation. You think you could start a case down there and see if you could come up with anything, meaning, if the DEA could go down there. Well, basically what I did was I just put on soft clothes, meaning like a T-shirt or a tank top, and I didn't carry a gun. I didn't carry my badge. I didn't even tell the DEA because I couldn't go down there with surveillance. No, there would have been. It's bad enough. A guy like a white Italian kid in that neighborhood doesn't fit in, and then I'm going to have a group of guys following me in vehicles. It would have never worked. So I went down there and I hung out on my own in those projects for a couple of weeks, and I finally get to meet a couple of people, and I tell them they think I'm a wise guy, and I tell them I'm looking to buy some weight, some crack weight of crack cocaine. And I end up meeting this guy. His name is Calvin Kline. Well, they called him Calvin Kline. His last name is Bacote. And I end up meeting him. And he is the guy that Jay-Z actually sings about in a few songs. According to Calvin, Calvin's on the internet and he's all over the YouTube and stuff. But according to some people, and Calvin also, Jay-Z actually took Calvin's persona on in these songs, and at some point before my case started with him, Calvin and Jay-Z got arrested out of state for a shooting, and they were both going to go to jail. And Calvin Kline, according to him, he knew that Jay-Z was going to go places as far as his music, so he took the rap for the shooting. He took the majority of the rap. Supposedly, he paid the victim to, and this is from what Calvin Kline says, that Calvin Kline paid the victim to say only one guy was involved, meaning him, and they let Jay-Z walk. And Jay-Z became this big famous guy. He sings about Calvin. And like I said, Calvin says that all the crimes and all the tough stuff that Jay-Z sings about is actually singing about Calvin Kline. But in any event, I did this case. I bought a bunch of crack from him, and we locked him up, and he did some substantial. Calvin Kline did some substantial time for that drug caliber.
Okay, I understand what I was confused about there now. Someone was asking earlier, and this is not something you would have covered, but your thoughts on the notorious B.I.G.'s murder in L.A. that took place.
What did they ask my opinion on it?
Yeah, like on how the LAPD handled the case. I'm not even that familiar with it, other than he was shot and it was gang related. So
yeah, I mean, there's supposed to be some LAPD guys involved that were involved with the rap scene and kind of corrupt. To be honest, I'm not that familiar with these. I know that the investigation got bungled, I guess you could say, or got screwed up somewhere along the line. And again, there's allegations that one of the cops is one or two of the cops are corrupt. But again, I don't have that much information on it. I don't really know that much about it actually.
Now it's apparently in the works that maybe there might be a movie about your book that Robert De Niro and Spike Lee have the rights to or something.
Well, they had the rights originally when the book first came out. De Niro and Showtime bought the rights, and Spike Lee was scheduled to direct, or supposed to be signed on to direct. And it just kind of fell by the wayside. It didn't happen. I actually saw a script that was written, and the script, I hate to say, was horrible. So I'm kind of glad it didn't happen. It was actually supposed to be a TV show, and then it got optioned again by a guy named Brad Furman, who did a few movies, and again, it didn't happen. Then I was contacted recently by the producers of Ray Donovan. They liked the book a lot. They wanted to try to make it a series. And then, I don't know, some things happened with that company. So I don't know. But it's been optioned a few times. I actually own the rights again. I don't know. I'd hope to get it sold eventually.
What was your scariest moment while working undercover?
Okay. That's a good question. I have a few, but I'll give you one that was pretty bad. Well, like I said, I have a few, but I'll give you one that was kind of bad. So I was up in Washington Heights, which is up in uptown Manhattan, and I was buying heroin off of these Dominican guys who I never met before. I was introduced to them by a guy I was dealing with for a while, but he couldn't get heroin, so he was bringing me to Washington Heights to meet these Dominican guys. So he introduces me to them, and then they actually tell him to leave in the car. This was in my vehicle, the car I was driving. They actually tell him to leave. So it's just me and this one Dominican guy, and there was my surveillance team was way off base, way off site because it's a very congested neighborhood, Washington Heights, especially then. I think it's changed a little bit now, but it wasn't unusual to see cars double and triple parked and basically taking up the whole street just by the way they parked their cars. It was nuts. And it seemed like it was an afternoon. Everybody was outside hanging out. I mean, elderly people, middle-aged people, everybody was outside. It was like nobody was working. And I got this guy in my car. This is the first time I'm meeting him. He asks me if I'm a cop. I tell him I'm not, obviously. And then he makes me drive. Now, I got no surveillance. It's just me and him. And there's a couple of guys shooting dice on the sidewalk in front of a house. And again, there's hundreds of people out. And he tells me, pull over here. And there was a fire hydrant there. So there was an empty spot. So I pulled into the parking spot. And the guys are shooting dice right next to me. And he tells me, you sure you're not a cop? And I tell him, I'm not a cop. And he says, you better not be. He says, turn around. And when I turn around, there was a guy right next to my ear with a Uzi machine gun pointed right at my head. And he says, if you're a cop, this guy's going to kill you. And I basically told him, I look like a fucking cop. And he's, we had a little bit of argument. And he gets the dope. Now, he comes back with the dope. And I give him the money. And now he's going to count this money. Now, this is how it went from bad to kind of worse. So now he's counting this money. And this is regular money. It's nothing special. The DEA doesn't do anything to this money. All they do is sometimes photostat. We weren't going to take this guy down then and there. He was part of this long-term investigation. So we weren't going to grab him now. And we didn't care if he had buy money on him. Whatever money we were going to give him, he was going to spend. So it wasn't like we did anything to this money. But as he's counting the money, and I want to say it was about $18,000. As he's counting this $18,000, for some reason, a stack of the money had red ink on it, almost like from a big, thick magic marker. And he's counting the money, and then all of a sudden he hits like these couple of bills in a row, like maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 bills with this red marker on it. And he thought it was marked money, which it wasn't marked money. But he thought it was because of just the nature of the way the red was on this paper, the money. And now I got to get into it again with him. And at this point, he's almost convinced that I'm a cop. And he's got the guy here with the machine gun, and me and him are arguing. And my surveillance team is nowhere around, and not by any fault of theirs. There was just nowhere for them. There was no safe place for them to watch me and not be, caught watching me, basically. But anyway, I got out of it, obviously, and lived to lock them up. So that was a pretty hairy moment.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Last fan question I'll give for today. This fan wants to know about Stephen Caracpa
and Louis Eppolito.
Yes.
Ask them about these two guys and what happened to them. I'll tell you what happened to them. Well, the guy Eddie Lino, who I spoke about earlier, who I did that robbery of the bar for, those two guys actually killed Eddie Lino on the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn. They pull him over and they kill him. Those are two cops, Eddie Caracalpa and Eppolito. Those are two cops that were criminals. No two ways about it. They were criminals who were working for the Lucchese crime family, and they actually killed this guy Eddie Lino, who was a Gambino guy, who was a John Gotti guy, on behalf of the Lucchese crime family. pulled him over as if it was a regular car stop, and they shot him to death on the Bell Parkway. They both been arrested. Eppolito, I believe, died just recently, maybe a year or two ago, and I believe Caracap is still alive. He died in jail, and Caracap is currently in jail, as far as I know.
Thanks for the update on that. And you, of course, were also involved in the Holly Ann Hughes missing child case. Could you tell us about that?
Holly Ann Hughes was a little girl in. Well, okay. So I'll start with her. So she was a little girl that lived in Staten Island. Back in 1981. She was 7 years old. Now she went to a bodega, right, in Staten Island, in like a poor neighborhood, and she went to buy soap for her mother. She didn't even have the money. She didn't even have the whatever it was, dollar or whatever it was, to buy the soap. In any event, in Staten Island back in the 80s and 70s, I don't know if anybody in anybody watching remembers Willowbrook. Willowbrook was a state-run mental facility that Geraldo Rivera did this big expose on, and he went in there with a camera and he found all these kids that were being mistreated, and the people in there all had mental issues. Either they were mentally deficient in one capacity or another. And Geraldo Rivera, like I said, he did this big expose on this facility, and there was a guy who had worked there. His name was Andre Rand. Andre Rand he started off as a maintenance man, or just a custodian, and he later becomes like a physical therapist for these people. And he's got no credentials to be a therapist at all. But again, these people were mistreated. They were starving. They were found in their own feces and urine, and that's what was going on there. But in any event, Andre Rand worked there, and he lived on the outside premises. It was a 300-acre property. There was buildings there with, these hospitals, so to speak, buildings, and he lived on the property. And he was mentally deficient too, this guy, Andre Rand. Now, he was known throughout Staten Island, and he was under investigation for a bunch of different child abductions. But they can never pin anything on him. But people knew him. There was the legend. In fact, there's a documentary called Cropsy, or The Legend of Cropsy, Cropsy, and it's about Andre Rand. Anyway, Andre Rand is this suspect, and he's, like I said, mentally deficient himself, and he was like the boogeyman. People were afraid of him. They heard of him. They knew of him. In any event, this little girl, Holly, now he's already a suspect in like 5 or 6 disappearances. And one of the disappearances is a woman that worked in the facility with him, a regular, like a nurse or something, and she's the last person seen with him, and she disappeared. So he's got this reputation, and people are afraid of him, and the cops can't pin anything on him. They eventually pin a kidnapping of Jennifer Schwager in 1980. I think she disappears in 1987. She's also mentally, she had suffered from Down syndrome, and he was seen with her. And eventually they were able to pin the kidnapping of Jennifer Schwager on this guy, Andre Rand. They found her body next to like I said, he was living outdoors in this facility, out near this facility, like in a tent with other homeless people, and there was underground tunnels, and it's a whole crazy story. But they eventually find her body next to his encampment, and they were able to pin him with the kidnapping of this girl, Jennifer Schwager. Well, he goes to jail, and he was due to get out in like the end of the 1990s. When I'm a missing person, I happened to run into a woman that I knew who had a rough life herself, and when she found out that I lived in Staten Island, that's where this all had taken place. Years before I lived here. Actually, while I was a kid, she said, "Oh, I have a friend whose daughter disappeared from Staten Island in 1981. And she told me the daughter's name was Holly Ann Hughes, and I knew her mother. Now, Holly Ann Hughes' mother had a rough life. She was involved with narcotics, and she had a rough life also. That's how these two women knew each other. So when this woman I knew told me about this, I said, let me go take a look at that case. And I did, and I found the case, and I found that Holly Ann Hughes, the case was basically sitting there. It was basically a dead case. They had no information on it. There were people that saw Andre Rand in the area the night Holly Ann Hughes disappeared, but they couldn't put him with her. And so the whole case was just like in a dead end street, basically. Well, I found the case. I went through it. There was one individual who they had been interviewed a bunch of times back when this happened in 1981, and he would never say that he saw Holly Ann Hughes with Andre Rand. He always said Holly Ann Hughes went to the store. I saw her at the store. I saw Andre Rand drive by a couple of times, but I didn't put. Anyway, I didn't believe him. This is going back again. This is the mid 90s when I'm looking at the case. It happened in 1981. Well, I was able to track this guy down, and he was a reformed alcoholic. At the time when this happened, he had been a drinker. I track him down. I sit him down, and he's basically saying the same story he said back in 1981, that Holly Ann Hughes went to the store. He's seen her go to the store. He's seen Andre Rand drive by a couple of times. All that. Basically, I thought it was bullshit. And I told him, I said, listen, man, basically, you saw Holly Ann Hughes and you saw Andre Rand and you saw them together. You just don't want to put them together. Why don't you want to put them together? And we went back at it. He was adamant about not putting them together, and I was adamant about him telling me the truth. And basically, after a long and arduous interview, he told me the truth. He did see Holly Ann Hughes in Andre Rand's car, and he did see them drive off together. Well, once he gave me that statement, I had him write it out. That statement, along with some of the statements from the other witnesses that saw her in the area, another witness that saw her talking to a guy who she thought was Andre Rand from a distance, with all these statements together. I had since, after I put a lot of this together, I had gotten transferred. I had already wanted to transfer way before this case. I got involved with it. Anyway, the case was, I handed the case over, or we handed the case over to another sergeant, another detective. And about a year later, Andre Rand was still in jail. He hadn't gotten out yet. They were able to re-arrest him on the Holly Ann Hughes kidnapping. He went to trial. He was convicted, and he'll never get out of jail, basically.
Wow, that's an incredible story. There's one more story we got to ask you to slip in here because it sounds interesting. A guy that read your book wants you to share the baseball bat story. Maybe you could read the book for the full version, but maybe if you could give us the short version.
I'll give you a really, really quick. All right. So we were talking about wise guys. So Canarsie, like I said, had a bunch of wise guys, like other old neighborhoods, I guess. And there was a wise guy from Brooklyn or from Canarsie. His name was Bruno. Now, everybody knew the name Bruno. Or I should say everybody, knock-around guys knew the name Bruno, but we didn't know what he looked like. And we were like 16, 17 years old. These are my close friends. We played high school football together. And we were hanging out together this particular summer night. And two of my friends, like I said, their godfather was Vicar Musso, the head of the Lucchese family. Another one of my friends' father was a connected guy. So it wasn't like we were babes in the woods. We all knew what time it was. We just didn't know who Bruno was. But again, we knew the name. So anyway, we're hanging out in front of this pizzeria, and this little Italian guy comes out and he tells us, we're making too much noise. We got to move on. Well, he told a couple of 16-year-old kids to move on, and we didn't feel like moving on, so we didn't. He went in the store. He came out again. And he told us to move again. And we told him, you know what? Go make your fucking pizzas. We'll move when we want to move, basically. And he was okay with that. He went back in the store. At this point, I was ready to go home. I had enough, not so much of him, just in general. It was getting late. I had enough. Me and one of my friends took off. While we leave, or after we left, this individual came out again with a baseball bat. And now he's going to try to hit my friends with the bat. But again, we're pretty tough kids. They take the bat from this guy and they tuned him up with the baseball bat. Well, the guy they tuned up was Bruno Facciolo, who was Bruno from Canarsie. And he was a made guy in the Lucchese family. His brother was a made guy in the Gambino family. In fact, they're the guys that in the movie Goodfellas that brought Joe Pesci to his death. Well, that was the brother. Bruno's brother was the guy who brought Tommy DeSimone to his actual death. And like I said, Bruno was an old school gangster. And my friends mistakenly beat him up. And now there had to be retribution for the beating that he took. And all my friends, I'll just leave it at this. All my friends had a bad couple of months after that. Some of them got shot, some of them got beaten. It wasn't good for any of them. And thank God I had left earlier, because I would have been in the mix. And going back to why I became a cop and didn't do that, stay in that life, was because one of my friends, and we all know, or we all assume we know who it was, gave up all my other friends. So as close as we were and as tight as we were, when shit hit the fan, one of my friends came forward and gave up everybody. Because there was no way Bruno would have known who anybody was. But he found out who everybody was, and he took retribution. So talking about treachery earlier on and backstabbing, and that's what that life was all about, and that's kind of what kept me out of it.
Treachery and backstabbing reminds me of the wrestling business in some ways. There's just less death. So want to tell people again where they can get your book and follow your YouTube channel. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing those stories.
Thank you for having me. Well, that's my book, Alphaville. That's a soft cover, 1988. Welcome to Heroin City. It's all over. It's on Amazon, anywhere you get books. It's in Barnes and Nobles. There's an audio version of it actually also. And my YouTube channel, I'm just starting it out. I got a bunch of videos on there. It's my name, Mike Codella, Codella, Up Against the Wall. And I talk about a lot of stuff in my book, some other cop stories, and just growing up in Brooklyn. I think guys will like it. If you like, knock around stories, it's a pretty good YouTube channel, I think.
Yeah, and those stories appeal to everyone. I mean, I didn't know about any of this stuff pretty much, and I found all of your stories interesting today. So thanks again for coming on. Maybe we can have a part 2 sometime, and I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
You know what? If you do go check out my channel, I really appreciate it if you follow me. And I know there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but you might like what I got. And I just want to say thank you to having me on today, man. Really, I had a good time. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all you guys.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video. Then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates.